welcome everyone this evening to the McMinnville City Council October 26, 2021 council meeting. We'll have Claudia do a roll call. Claudia?
Councillor Geary.
Here and first.
Councillor Garvin.
Here.
Councillor Minke.
Present.
Councillor Peralta.
Here.
Councillor Chenoweth.
Present.
Council President Drapkin.
Here.
And Mayor Hill.
Here. Thank you, Claudia. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will run us through the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This evening we have a proclamation that I really enjoy reading this every year. It's called the Extra Mile Day, and it's so fitting of McMinnville and our citizens and our volunteers. Whereas McMinnville, Oregon is a community which acknowledges that a special vibrance exists when the entire community, when its individual citizens collectively go the extra mile in personal effort, volunteerism, and service. And whereas McMinnville is a community which encourages its citizens to maximize their personal contribution to the community by giving themselves wholeheartedly and with total effort, commitment, and conviction to their individual ambitions, family, friends, and community. And whereas McMinnville, Oregon is a community which chooses to shine a light and celebrate individuals and organizations within its community who go the extra mile in order to make a difference and lift up fellow members of their community. And whereas McMinnville, Oregon acknowledges the mission of the extra mile of America to create the 550 extra mile cities in America, and it is proud to support the Extra Mile Day on November 1st, 2021. Therefore, I, Scott A. Hill, Mayor of the Scott A. Hill, Mayor of the City of McMinnville, Oregon, do hereby proclaim November 1st, 2021 as Extra Mile Day. And I urge each individual in the community to take the time on this day, not only to go the extra mile in their own lives, but also acknowledging all those who are inspirational in the efforts and commitments to make their organizations, family, community, country, or world a better place. In witness thereof, I have herefore set my hand and caused the official seal of the City of McMinnville to be attached this the 26th day of October 2021. Signed, Scott A. Hill, Mayor of McMinnville. Thank you. We are now to the point where we would take comments from community members. Anyone that would like to speak on a topic other than an item that is a matter of litigation, quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing at some future date can be addressed. The announced comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and Claudia will recognize you. And those, if you're on the phone, I'll call for anyone on the phone that would like to participate in this piece. Again, announce your name, your address for the record. And so we will now open it up for public comment. Claudia?
Looks like no one has signed up or raised their hand. I did want to state for the record, we did receive an email from Dan Masterson, Sila McLeland, Scott Cunningham, Donna Day, and Corey Gwynn that I forward to council tonight, and they'll be made part of the record.
Thank you, Claudia. Okay, that takes us to advice and information this evening. And this is the opportunity we have for our city councilors to report on their committee and board assignments. The first thing that we have that we want to do here is a motion to adopt the city council core values, core focus, and niche as presented at our meeting prior to this, our level 10, October 26, 2021. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt those core values, core focuses, and niche by that were presented by Wendy Stassens at our 5:30 meeting today. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Seconded.
It's been moved by Council President Drabkin and seconded by Councilor Geary. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, indicate by a nay. And so we have adopted the core values, core focuses, and niches, and that has passed unanimously this evening, 6-0. Thank you for all of those, the good discussion and the hard work that everyone has put into that. With that being said, now let's move over to Councilor's report. And I'm going to go with Chris first. Go ahead, Chris.
So I'll start with the MEVLC. We met a week, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, and started some conversation regarding what we were going to do with some money that's been provided by Ron Noble, that he would like specifically dedicated toward trying to help businesses that had economic impacts as a result of COVID, and how we can steer those dollars in that purpose. I don't have a lot to report at this point. We're going to be normally we only have one meeting a month, but we're going to have a second meeting tomorrow to try to kind of wrap this up and see what direction we're going to go and for recommendations. And so I will bring that back with more detail. Then I can tell you at this point, they're looking at two different ways. One is an immediate help, providing maybe some money to businesses that are offering, businesses that actually have employees that work on premise, such as restaurants and the like, that are offering some sort of 90-day bonus if you stick with them for 90 days to get bodies in the door. Another item they're looking at is potentially funding for I don't want to say scholarship, I can't think of the right word, it's just gone out of my brain and I don't have it down on my sheet, but a program to entice workers to businesses that require some extra skill, that we could perhaps fund Chemeketa to make sure that those programs exist. The Historical Landmarks Committee met also. There were a couple of topics that we discussed. A downtown design modification request for the building that's going in at 631 Northeast 1st Street. They wanted to look at changing it from stucco to hardy plank due to escalating costs. And that was approved with some modifications. If you're interested in details, I can give them to you later. The second question that was brought before them was First Federal at the base of their building had this metal trim that goes along right alongside the concrete. What did that or did that not meet the condition of approval? It was determined that did not meet the condition of approval and was sent back to First Fed and the planning department try to work through the process of getting that to meet condition of approval. The last topic we discussed was we're gearing up toward getting a historic preservation marketing program out there to try to encourage those that have historical pieces of property to maintain them and take care of them, and the importance of why we're trying to keep these on the registry and keep them maintained. That's just at the beginning of the process, but more to come. That's my reports.
Thank you, Chris. Let's move over to Zach.
Excellent, thank you. Landscape Review Committee met last week. Heard 2 landscape review plans and a street tree removal. The plan, one was for the 9th and Lafayette Avenue Dental Clinic, and the other was for McMinnville Water and Lights fueling station expansion over there. And then, like I said, a street tree removal. And MacPac will be meeting again next week as we work to zero in the recommendation back to council. So that's my committee's reports. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Let's move to Kelly.
Okay, 2 reports. Try and make them fast here. Visit McMinnville's report. Visit McMinnville is partnering with Weinstein PR, a long-standing Portland area PR firm, to elevate media opportunities. This is a big step up for Visit McMinnville. They're also partnering with Avenue, a B Corp digital advertising agency, to increase efficacy and engagement with digital and social ads, as well as improve results on Google search. They're also leading an ongoing workforce and industrial support, planning around resources and career pathways at the county, regional, and state levels. And they've kicked off a feasibility study around outdoor recreational development opportunities. Finally, they've also participated in presentations to Oregon Tourism Leadership Academy and the Oregon Main Street Association on effective partnerships. Moving over to YCAP. Briefly, the food bank has received sufficient funding for the 3rd electric pallet jack. So they've now got 3 of them along with their forklift, which lifts everything up, and then the pallet jacks move everything around. This money came in from a private donor who has expressed interest. Youth Services has received 2 new state grants totaling $260,000, which will help fund the renovation of the McMinnville Drop-In Center, as well as staffing for the location. These are 2 brand new sources of funding for the Youth Outreach Program. Development is working on Youth Outreach Director and the next steps to these grants. So exciting news. We might be seeing a Youth Outreach program here by the 1st of the year. The turnkey project continues to move forward. Construction is to begin around October 13th on 2 of the rooms converted into ADA rooms. In the lobby office areas, plans are in place to convert the spaces into offices, a break room for staff, and areas will be designated for YCAP security and property management use. They're working on updating the operations manual for the turnkey project. They're in the midst of planning for the navigation center in the McMinnville continues. Meetings continue and plans are forming up. The process of developing a tentative budget for YCAP will use this for the 3-year pilot project. Working with Providence, they're also working with Providence to coordinate a program which will provide 5 hotel rooms from January 1st to December 31st, 2022, providing services to the homeless individuals in Newburgh. And let's see, they have 2.8 million of a total of 5.7 million rental assistance that they have to still give out by the end of this year. And they are actually hiring additional people to make sure that all that money is disseminated to help with rental assistance. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Kelly. Remy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tomorrow, the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission meets, and one thing that we'll be addressing there is preparing for our presentation to the McMinnville City Council on November 17th. That's a work session, and that's going to be on focus on construction excise tax. We're also going to be reviewing an opportunity to do some work with the Housing Authority and a way to possibly bring some additional funding into the city, so or into the Housing Authority. So that should be an interesting presentation. And unfortunately, I was unable to attend the DEI Advisory Committee last week, so I don't have a report on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Remy. Let's go to Adam.
Yeah, none of my committees have met since our last meeting. We had YCOM will be meeting next month, along with the fire districting will be meeting in the middle of November. So I'll report back with that. We haven't had an airport commission meeting in some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Sal?
Thank you, Mayor. Today, the Rental Property Maintenance Inspection Program Committee met for its final meeting. Last year, you'll recall that the council passed a legal framework for the city to regulate rental properties for maintenance-related issues that could affect safety and livability. We've had a work group of business owners and housing advocates working together for the last year to develop an active rental unit maintenance inspection program. We wrapped up our work today and we'll be bringing our recommendations to council on the 9th of November. Council of Governments, folks should have received an invitation by now, but the COG is having this Thursday from 11:30 to 1 via Zoom, a convening on regional housing affordability and solutions for regional housing affordability. A lot of really interesting information should be there. We'll have people involved with the state's regulatory agencies, a lot of folks representing realtors and developers and so on, coming in to kind of have a conversation about possible solutions for housing affordability in the region. I encourage people who are interested in that to attend. And then this weekend, I had an opportunity to participate in the McMinnville City Cleanup Day. I just wanted to thank Nick and other members of Heather's staff, especially Nick, for helping to facilitate that effort. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sal.
The only committee that I have been a part of this over the last 2 weeks is the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. We've received some distressing information. As I've been reporting, we were slated to receive $8 million from Congresswoman Bonamici and 2 from Wyden and Merkley's office, but all of those earmarks have been taken away given the budgeting process that they're going through. So we've lost $10 million from that perspective. We've lost $10 million from ODOT. They picked a project that's on I-5 south of Kubler Road. They're going to be putting in a slow truck lane to go up the hill there. So all that good work that we were working on is kind of floating away from us. And so I had an opportunity to talk to Dave Hogelberg today, and we're meeting with ODOT and trying to zero in on what we can do to keep our bypass in a position to be front of the line, so to speak. So that's the only thing I had to report. Let's move over to department heads, and we'd like to consider authorizing city attorney to appeal the decision in the Yamhill County Circuit Court case number 21 CV 32595. At this point, I'll call on our city attorney, Amanda Guile-Hinman, to present. Amanda?
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. As the council is aware, the city is currently in a dispute with the News Register regarding a public records request to the McMinnville Police Department for police files related to the investigation of David Jubb. The parties had a hearing on Friday, October 22nd, in the Circuit Court for Yamhill County. A decision has not yet been provided by the court, and likely the earliest that a decision would be provided is November 1 based on the court's schedule. So today I'm seeking authority to potentially file an appeal if one becomes necessary, but there's a couple of moving parts that are pretty important to whether or not, even with the authority, whether or not I would be filing the appeal. First, as I mentioned, there's not yet a decision by the judge in the case. So obviously, if the city ends up being successful, we wouldn't be filing an appeal. And second, as of yesterday, a plea and sentencing hearing in the criminal matter was scheduled for this Thursday. So if that hearing actually goes through and is completed, then the criminal case will be adjudicated it'll be completed, which would change the nature of the protection of the documents. So if we want to appeal the decision and the decision is issued on November 1st, I need to make sure I have time. I have time to file the appeal, and with the way that the council schedule is working, I probably wouldn't be able to get back in time to get council's authority. So I am requesting authorization to file an appeal pending the outcome of the October 22nd hearing and pending the plea and sentencing hearing currently scheduled for this Thursday.
Thank you, Amanda. Is there a motion to authorize the city attorney to appeal the decision in Yamhill County Circuit Court, case number 21 CV 32595?
So moved.
Second.
It's been a motion by Kelly Minke and Councillor Chris
That guy.
We got it. Chenoweth to move this motion forward. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This motion passes unanimously 6-0. Let's move on to members of the staff. Let's go with Heather.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Nothing to report tonight.
Thank you. Let's see, David Renshaw.
Evening, Your Honor. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Just nothing really important to report other than street crews started their annual leaf program, and it looks like just in time. So that's going to keep us pretty busy from now to the end of the year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Good evening. So I do have something to report. If I may be so bold, I am going to share my screen so that you can see this data. The county, are you guys able to see it?
Yes, Jennifer.
Okay, great. The county turned the rolls for property tax a couple of weeks ago, and I just thought it would be important to note that for the city of McMinnville, so this is the rates that will be in our property tax bills that we should get any day now. Last year, this number was $16.95, and now it is $16.59, and that reduction is primarily being driven by the fact that the Parks Improvement Bond has now been finished. So the last payment happened in August. I think there was a question about that at the work session on Wednesday, and so it has indeed been paid off. And so that means that for folks within the city limits, your property tax bills, the date is wrong, but this year they're down 2.1% property tax rate. So I just wanted to point that out to folks.
Good news.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Then secondarily, in another bit of good financial news, we're zeroing in on our financial statements for the year that closed June 30, 2021. And at this point, it's looking like the general fund will end the year better than what we projected in the budget process. So that's good news. It's looking to be north of $500,000 to the good for the general fund. So shwoo, yay. It didn't move in the other direction. Just with all of the uncertainties around COVID, I was really nervous about how things actually would land. So So that's good, and I will be bringing you more details once we're able to kind of go through and do some more analysis. So that's what I had to share this evening with folks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's go up to Matt.
Mayor, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, just a couple quick reports. Happy to report last week we finished countywide CIT crisis intervention training where 5 of our officers were able to complete that, and we involved ourselves, Yamhill County Sheriffs and Newburgh-Dundee PD in partnership with HHS. So really good class. So we are excited for those people that finished that 40-hour block of training. And lastly, real quickly, as you may recall, last year we did plug some money in for a federal grant for body cameras, and in light of potentially coming on board with those, and sometimes we began last week a pilot project where we're doing some testing of some body cams by a few of our officers. So as we get through this, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we do get some federal money, I'll keep you abreast of how things have gone with that. But we are wearing some body cameras, at least a few of us. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Rich?
Mr. Mayor and Council, the fire department will be conducting a promotional process for captain to replace Captain Slavens, who was promoted to battalion chief. We also have 4 conditional offers out there for the vacancies, which include the internal promotion process. So we only have 1 vacancy that we are currently working on, and that's one of the vacancies for the peak unit. Other than that, we are in backgrounds and conditional offers, working through the processes of conditional offers for those employees or potential employees.
Thank you, Chief. Let's go to Leland.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Scott?
Nothing for the council tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Susan?
Nothing for me tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll end up with Jeff. Jeff?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. One piece of information that you've had for a little while, but it's the first public meeting since we made the official announcement. Ann Pagano will be the next Public Works Director for the city of McMinnville. She's a registered civil engineer and comes with extensive public and private sector experience. She will begin on November 1st. Excited to do that. It also gives me an opportunity to publicly thank David Renshaw and Leland Kester in particular, who stepped up and have been working with the executive team for the last several months as we work through our core services, revenue, and ARPA projects, while they have also been running their division and helping Josh Adelman, who's been acting as the engineering services director, navigate that process. David and Leland, with mostly good cheer and a lot of hard work, have added a lot of value over the last couple of months. And I just want to publicly acknowledge the extra work that they have done and how much I have appreciated it. And I think the rest of the team has appreciated it as well. And then final item, I'll let you know that I'll be back in Washington, D.C. on ICMA business November 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's all I have to report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We also have a part of our packet, the July 2021 cash and investment report. That takes us to our consent agenda this evening. We've got 3 items in that consent agenda, and I'll ask if any counselor would request to have any item removed from the consent agenda and heard at its regular place on the agenda. Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Zach and seconded by Kelly. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, signify by saying nay. The consent agenda this evening passes unanimously 6-0. This evening, we have a number of resolutions. Our first resolution is Resolution 2021-54, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of McMinnville approving allocations of the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds. So we'll call on City Manager Jeff Towery to present. Jeff?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Last week at your joint work session and meeting with the Budget Committee recommended a slate of projects to be funded through ARPA dollars or partially funded through ARPA dollars. We have identified a series of high priority and medium priority projects that are included in the exhibit to the resolution. If the council chooses to approve this resolution consistent with the recommendation of the Budget Committee, our next step from a staff perspective would be to bring back those individual projects with specific budgets, implementation plans, and timeframes. Our initial focus will be on the high priority category projects in their general order of ranking, but they'll also be informed by readiness to proceed. There are some projects that we think we can move more quickly than others. We will bring those forward to you. We have mentioned on a couple of occasions that there would also be supplemental budgets required for our projects. There may be a handful of projects that can be funded through the fund where the ARPA monies are currently budgeted, but most of the projects will in fact require budget transfers and supplemental budgets. Our recommendation is that you approve the resolution before you tonight, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jeff. Councilors, do you have any questions of Jeff? Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, my objection to adopting this tonight would be the same as for our next resolution, and that would just be for the shortness of notice that we put out to the public. It was just published yesterday in our packet, and that gives me pause when we put something in at the very last minute. I know we as counselors and the Budget Committee knew that it was becoming available, and we are likely going to vote on it this meeting, but given that it wasn't until yesterday afternoon, I would rather see both of these items voted on our first meeting in November, and given that, I would also be open to having our meeting in our second meeting in November, given that we all Zoom in anyway. So even if we are traveling for Thanksgiving, I still think we'd be fine to meet so we could adopt both of these if they need to go to two different readings at two different meetings.
Thank you, Adam.
Mayor, just one process point. These are resolutions which do not require second readings by the council. So one action is all that's necessary.
Thank you, Jeff. Chris?
Thank you.
I'd like to just thank you very much, Mayor, and I'd like to echo what Adam said. I think we should, putting items up like this that are really major decisions that are facing the city up with one-day notice to our citizens, that just gives me pause as well. I don't think it's a good idea for us to be voting it on the very next day after it was put in the packet.
Thank you, Chris. Kelly?
I appreciate my colleague's concern, but in all honesty, this has been at least a 4-month process for both of these. There's been more than enough opportunities, and there was civilian or citizen representation in the form of the Budget Committee. I just don't see the need to extend this.
Thank you, Kelly. Any other discussion? Zach?
What would be the Jeff? What would be the ramifications of doing this next meeting versus this meeting? And my impetus there is I sort of agree on both accounts, and my main driving focus has been, we're nearing cracking open the formulation of next budget. You guys need to really understand what you're going to be able to work on next year, every department wise, and the real the real end goal hasn't been finding good ways to spend this money. The real end goal hasn't been figuring out what the core services is. The real end goal hasn't been sustainable city revenue. The real end goal has been tying those all together to give staff a direction before we formulate what we're going to do next year. And so my chief, I know in a lot of our meetings, I've sat there and said, how do we move this forward? How do we communicate that either we're going to get this done and staff has direction or we aren't? And so I'm erring on the side of, the sooner we can get this to you guys, the better. But what are the ramifications on, I know some of this stuff we had talked about is like, there's no magic wand. You aren't going to have, 40 mowers and a chipper tomorrow. You aren't going to have the brand new ambulance tomorrow. You aren't going to have the grant writer tomorrow. So what are the ramifications of getting this on for the first week of November, or the first meeting in November?
Practically, there's really no negative impact to do it. It's technically 2 more weeks before we have formal direction to move on these projects. None of them are so ready to go that they would be ready to spend on within the next 2 weeks. We certainly can roll these items to your next regular council meeting as they exist now.
Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, if I
Go
may,
ahead,
Mr. Mayor,
Jack.
a follow-up, if I may. Would you use the time sort of to do things that we feel like you've already sort of done, like the grant writer for ARPA? Would you continue to do the job description, or look for those with our direction, the writing on the wall being what it is? Could you still sort of be ready, prep for hitting the ground running when it does go through, or would it be?
Sure. I mean, we could continue the initial staff work. It was a clear majority recommendation of the Budget Committee, and the majority of the council supported the recommendation from the Budget Committee as well. So, if the council is more comfortable rolling these items for a couple of weeks, again, we're happy to schedule them for your next council meeting. I guess I'd look to Jennifer, if there's anything in particular that she's aware of that may create some either additional work or some immediate delays for us.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we addressing ARPA in particular, I mean, we have the funding, so we can continue to progress. I mean, the position that you mentioned, Councilor Gary, has been posted, so we can, continue along that path. We wouldn't make any commitments or make any hiring offers without having all of this stuff in place. But yeah, I don't think there's any practical negative impact, honestly. Another 2 weeks. So, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jennifer. Was that your question, Zach? Okay, let's go over to Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to loop back around with Councilor Menke's comments. I don't disagree that there's been great discussion around this product, this process. I just feel philosophically putting something in the day before a packet. That's one of the reasons I ran for council, is because that was going on back before I was on council. And so that's just a sticking point for me, regardless what the subject matter is. I think our citizens should have more time to see a packet before we're casting votes on it.
Thank you, Adam. Chris?
You'd think I'd figured out how to hit the right buttons on my screen. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just quick question. Jeff, would that give you, that 2-week time frame, be adequate to give you time to provide for us a roadmap of how we're going to fund the fire department as asked for by Councilor Garvin, and clearly a majority of the council seemed to voice a desire to see that happen, so that we could have that in concert with that vote?
I think the likelihood is that we could have that information ready for the council during that council meeting. Rich and I haven't talked specifically about which date we'd like to hit, but it's probably a doable exercise. It would show up as a separate item. It's not. I mean, while there was related conversation, it's not. It would just show up as a separate item as opposed to either, intertwined or incorporated into either of these two resolutions.
Well, I can speak for myself. I think I would really appreciate if that could be done, because it would address one of the main concerns and sticking points of conversation that was raised during the ARPA funding conversation. Sure. And if we can have that all in one meeting, that would help alleviate that concern from maybe being a stumbling block on on the process.
Sure, we'll do our best.
Any other discussion? Zach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam, I think to your point, I generally agree, but I think if you descend into the particulars of this matter, to Councilor Minke's point, we've had this overarching topic in discussions, and frankly, the packet almost identical in a long lead up and a long group of conversations. I think it isn't a lot of things on there that aren't already out in the open and have been discussed. I think the ramifications too of us moving this forward and approving still have opportunity for double check in as we've laid out. There's supplemental budgets, there's continued discussion, there's just ways we can spend. We've pulled some funds back, so we have not consumed all the allocation. I think yeah, while I generally agree with you, I think if we descend into the particulars, I don't feel the same rub on this when you just say, it was a late addition to the agenda. And I also understand that, well, we didn't have a past anything to add until we completed our work less than a week ago. So I'm balancing that between that and getting staff direction and moving forward, because it's two weeks sooner than we could have all this good work started and done. So I think that was more just discussing out loud and wanting to acknowledge and honor your point. I think it was a good point, but that was my reaction to it.
Thank you, Zach. Let's go to Sal.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess the only two comments I have are the first point that I don't know that anybody acknowledged that Jeff pointed out that we don't really need two votes on this, just one. So I heard staff say that it's not going to, delay their work at all to put it off, and I just don't feel strongly about it either way. So if we have a consensus to address this in a week or so, or a couple weeks at the next meeting, that's fine with me. If not, then that's also fine for me. My main interest is seeing these things get moved forward in this calendar year. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Sal. Let's go back to Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Geary, for your comments. Like I said with Kelly, I do agree that this subject's had ample time. It's just philosophically, I just can't see moving something forward when there's not really a major impact, as Jeff and Jennifer both pointed out. I think it's just the right thing to do for our citizens, to give them ample time. Granted, the ARPA list hasn't gotten much public comment, but I think we've gotten 5 or 6 emails in related to the next resolution. And so, yes, I am tying both of these together because they were both just added at the same time. And although I would like a discussion at our next meeting around fire, that's not my principal reason for moving this to the next meeting. If that discussion happens, that would be great, given the timeline we were quoted in our work session, but that's not the goal of moving this forward. The goal of moving this forward is to give our citizens ample time. And if the fire could come on as a third item at the next meeting, I would be ecstatic, but that's not the goal of pushing this down the road.
Thank you, Adam. Let's go to Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I just thank you, Councilor Geary, for your comments. I wanted to express kind of a similar statement that Councilor Garvin just made, which is, my backing Councilor Garvin's initial request to put this off for till the next meeting was based on the principle that we do need to give our constituents more than a day notice before we pass anything. It's just the principle. You know, I as a member of recently of being just not a member of this council, I can tell you that just because we spent 4 months as counselors going over this does not mean our constituents knew what we were doing for the last 4 months. Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have, but it doesn't mean they did. They followed the packet, and we didn't have a final decision of what we were going to do until just last week. I was mentioning that because since the time frame might open up for that, referring to the fire department, that it would just be great if we could have that time in at the same time. But that's not the reason I'm in favor of moving this. And particularly since it's already going to be no burden to the staff, I can't see a legitimate reason in my mind not to wait the 2 weeks. It's a better look for us as a council.
Thank you, Chris. Kelly?
Well, in view of the other gentleman's concerns, I am willing to concede my point. I personally would really like to see the positions on the fire district explained, though, at the next meeting. And since that was sort of promised to us, I'm truly hoping that that will be the case.
Thank you, Kelly. Zach?
Yeah, I think I probably would align with Sal in that I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, or I could talk myself into both arguments. And I appreciate Councillor Garvin. What I heard him say was this isn't a tool or a device of leverage to get any other things moved forward, which is what I would fear. And if nothing else comes from the agenda or any other things added to the pot to sweeten it other than time, and then we would have their support on this at the first meeting in November, then that would probably push me over the edge to giving it that time to marinate and letting feedback happen. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting this going, and not, 2 less weeks to wait for the long lead time ambulance on ARPA funds, and 2 less weeks to wait for the long lead time on that chipper. Just going to be, more impact. But if this isn't a tool or a guise to get leverage something else forward on an agenda, then great. I'd in favor of working as a 6-person group on one common goal. I'd be fine with that.
Thank you, Zach. Okay, we are in the middle of a process, and so I am going to ask for a motion to approve resolution number 2021-54. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor? Mayor, can I make a suggestion? I mean, I would, it seems to me that the body is willing to roll these items forward rather than force a vote on them as published. I think that you can direct us by motion to simply roll these 2 items, items 7A and 7B, forward to the November 9th regular council meeting.
Thank you, Jeff. Sal?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we push both of these 2 agenda items to the next regular council meeting.
Second.
It's been moved by Sal and seconded by Chris. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We will be moving resolution number 2021-54 and 2021-55 to our next regularly scheduled council meeting on November 9th. Thank you. That now takes us to ordinance. And so we have consideration for the first reading with a possible second reading of ordinance number 5105. I'm going to ask if any councilor member needs to declare a potential conflict of interest or recluse themselves from recuse themselves regarding this ordinance. Okay, seeing none, then we will now consider the matter of ordinance number 5105. Does any councilor object to having the ordinance read by title only? Then we will have the city attorney please read the ordinance by title only. Amanda?
This is the first reading of ordinance number 5105, an ordinance amending Title 17 zoning of the McMinnville City Code, adopting docket G2-21, housing related legislative amendments, amending chapters 17.33, 17.54, 17.60, 17.63, and adding chapter 17.66.
Thank you, Amanda. We will at this point call on Planning Director Heather Richards to present, and I see that Tom's on the line with us too. So Heather and Tom.
Yeah, so actually, Mayor, I'm going to defer this ordinance to Tom, and then I will be picking up the next ordinance.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Tom.
Great. Thank you. This item is on page 65 of your packet. Again, it's Ordinance 5105, which is our planning docket number G22-21. It's a package of amendments related to housing that includes three major components. The first one is addressing how existing single-family dwellings in duplexes and accessory dwelling units associated with existing single-family homes are addressed as permitted uses in the C3 commercial zone. It establishes a city center housing overlay zone boundary and adopts some provisions associated with that city center housing overlay. And third, it addresses provisions for temporary use of an RV during construction of a home. So this is a legislative action. It amends several chapters of the zoning ordinance in Title 17 of the Municipal Code. A little more detail, the provisions again on the first element deal with existing single family dwellings and duplexes and how they're regulated, and also accessory dwellings associated with those. So proposing to update those provisions. I'll go into a little more detail momentarily. The city center housing overlay boundary will be established, and the associated provisions primarily focus on residential densities in that zone, residential parking requirements for number of parking spaces and location, and then some provisions with our standards dealing with non-conforming development when it's destroyed by calamity, what the parameters are for when that's rebuilt. And the third one, again, is just standalone dealing with temporary use of RV when a home is being constructed. This relates to the council goal of creating diverse housing opportunities that support great neighborhoods, the city goal, and the objective of collaborating to improve the financial feasibility of diverse housing opportunities. That bundle of amendments I noted includes a couple major components. Those related to the city center housing overlay zone are items that come out of the City Center Housing Strategy final report that was recommended by a project advisory committee and the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee and adopted by Council this past May by resolution. It includes some amendments recommended by the Affordable Housing Committee that went forward through, they recommend that be forwarded through the Planning Commission for consideration and recommendation to Council. And then the Planning Commission held a work session on the topic and a public hearing and made some revisions to the draft that they're recommending to Council. And there's one additional item in the proposal recommended by staff that I'll talk through as well. So initially, we looked at the first item was to look at allowing existing single family dwellings as a permitted use in the zone. And so we looked at that further, noticed that the same issue applied to both single family dwellings and duplexes. So those are not permitted uses in the commercial zone, new single family homes and duplexes. So those that are already there are regulated as non-conforming uses and are not allowed to expand at all. As we look through this, the additional recommendation from staff is that there should be a provision addressing accessory dwelling units associated with existing single family dwellings as well from both a policy standpoint and to address compliance with the provision of state law. So again, Currently, they're non-conforming uses. They can't be expanded on, such as if someone came in and wanted to add a bedroom to a home that's there, they wouldn't be able to expand that because the use is not permitted for that use as a new, either new development or for those that are there, there are significant limitations on what can be done with them. So this proposal is a way to allow for continued use of those single family homes and duplexes that are already present in the commercial zone without allowing for new single family dwellings and duplexes. So it's kind of a finer grained way of regulating the use than we normally have. This would not allow for these to be expanded onto other lots or the lots to be increased in size. And there are some aspects that are similar to a non-conforming use where the use needs to continue its residential use. If it's discontinued for more than a year, then the future use would need to be for a permitted use. And in looking at some of the uses that are, we often see interest from property owners to have a property that's in residential use, sometimes in use for a short-term rental, and sometimes kind of going back and forth between those. So this is written such that if it's converted to a short-term rental for a period of time, and then someone wants to return that back to residential use, that would be considered a continuation of the residential use for purposes of allowing that to continue under the standards that would allow it to be expanded if the property owner so desired. So that's the first major component. There is a provision in state law that discusses that wherever single family dwellings are permitted use, that accessory dwelling unit should be a permitted use as well. So this provision to allow an accessory dwelling unit in conjunction with an existing single family dwelling is proposed as well under this section. That's reflected in your ordinance and findings. Second major item is the provisions for establishing the city center housing overlay zone and associated provisions. So again, that was the final report was recommended by MIRAC and the Project Advisory Committee, approved by council. The purpose of the city center housing strategy is to create a strategy to potentially increase and incentivize more housing within the city center area and the surrounding higher density residential zones where there may be more capacity for additional housing opportunities. And what's proposed is to establish an overlay zone that closely corresponds with the study area boundary and where these provisions for the city center housing zone would apply. And what's proposed before you now would be implementation of some of the initial action items in the city center housing strategy that are intended to remove some of the regulatory barriers and make a difference to housing development, redevelopment that's generally, and some projects that may benefit from that in the near term as well. So the map on the screen does show the overlay zone boundary as proposed. Generally follows what was in the study area, again, with some minor modifications around the edges. And the city center housing strategy had four major sections in it. The first one dealing with removal of regulatory barriers had a series of 8 actions that were recommended, identified. And this largely accomplishes the first 4 of those. Some of the others, we looked at whether it would make sense to come forward at the same time with this package of amendments. And the recommendation this time is just the first 4, and we're working on the residential design and development standards proposal. That work is still underway, so we would anticipate bringing forward these other action items to remove barriers at the same time those standards would come forward. So there's some relationship between those. Currently, this would modify some of the provisions regarding density. Right now, some of the standards for density in the commercial zone reference back to the standards for the R4 zone. This would move those multifamily and condominium uses into the permitted use category, regardless of the density. In terms of number of parking spaces, the proposal would reduce the off-street parking to a lower requirement than what's currently required now. one standard applying in general within the overlay boundary, and then also some further reduction for smaller units in the small core area around the downtown. Finally, in parking, currently residential uses are the only uses within that some of these areas that are required to have their parking on site rather than being nearby on an adjacent property subject to a parking agreement. And when you start getting into developments where you're trying to build out to the sidewalk, if there's an on-site parking requirement, sometimes that means a lot of the lot gets consumed with things just even for a drive aisle to get to the back of the lot to get a single parking space. So this provides some flexibility in how parking could be met for residential development. And then finally, there's some standards proposed that would provide some relief around if a non-conforming residential use is destroyed by calamity, how it can be rebuilt. And again, the commercial zone references some of the standards of the R4 zone and put some limitations on reconstructing if it doesn't meet those standards. And some of those R4 standards that we have in place today aren't the, what you would typically think of as the kind of fit you would have in a downtown type of environment for multifamily housing. And many of those, maybe not many, some of those are built to a standard that probably predated those R4 standards in the commercial zones in the core area. And this would allow them to rebuild consistent with the R3 or C3 standards rather than meeting all of the R4 standards if they're looking to rebuild and potentially even adding some units. So that's the second component of the bundle before you. The third one addresses temporary use of an RV as a residence on a property while a home's being constructed, or in case of a manufactured home if it's being installed. So this allows somebody to live on the property without having to maintain their prior residence during construction, during that period where the home's being constructed, and makes that previous housing available to someone else to purchase as well. We looked at what some other communities had done around this issue. There are a number of communities that have these provisions in place, others that are considering them. And this isn't intended to be additional, to change the zoning for allowing additional housing or use of an RV as additional housing. This wouldn't conflict with or contradict any of the city's safe overnight parking program requirements. But basically it would set the parameters for which someone could use that RV and when that would need to be terminated when they moved into the home. So that's the three major components of what's before you this evening. And again, bringing you the recommendation of the Planning Commission with that one additional revision recommended by staff, and that's incorporated into the ordinance and the findings in front of you. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
So any questions of Tom? Go ahead, Remy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Tom, thank you. It was a great and very clear presentation. My question is just over the definition of destroyed by calamity. Is there an existing definition? Because I can see that as being something that's could be open to interpretation, or
there is a definition that applies today, and so that would continue to apply. What we would be doing is modifying the standards. Let me pull that up here momentarily. I can describe that definition to you here. Excuse me, just one moment while I pull that up.
Sure.
Sorry for the delay here.
That's okay. I guess part of my question was kind of like if you were relating this to auto insurance, right? Sometimes your vehicle seems as though it's perfectly usable, but your insurance company tells you no, in fact, it's quote unquote totaled. And so that's kind of what I was wondering about this, is who makes that determination of destroyed, and what constitutes a calamity?
may have overgeneralized. This is the language in the, Chapter 1763 of the zoning ordinance. It deals with destruction of structures. And so it says if a non-conforming structure or a structure containing a non-conforming use in one of these categories is destroyed by fire, accident, or act of God, the structure may be rebuilt to the same size, may be occupied by the use which occupied the structure at the time of destruction. And then this is the provision that is somewhat more limiting. It says in the case of destruction of a non-conforming multifamily residential structure, the structure, if rebuilt, may not contain more living units than existed prior to the destruction. So this is the language. The destruction by calamity was sort of general language that I used, but it's not the language used in the ordinance itself. It's kind of common terminology used for that, but this is the actual language.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm fully supportive of moving this forward, and I'm happy to see some of the kind of, low-hanging fruit of affordable housing included in here. It would be nice to, if this passes, it will be nice to have some of those alterations. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Remy. Any other questions for Tom? Zach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Tom, for the great presentation. A question on the amendments to Chapter 17.54 General Regulations germane to allowing the temporary use of an RV as a residence during construction. What subsection is that? Is it adding something in there, or is it amending? I mean, I say 54, and I was looking through the general, and I didn't see things. I saw something more akin to like temporary structures. Is that what we're considering that? We're just calling it an RV in here. So are you able to point me to a more drilled down subsection that you're amending or adding? Or is it just adding a new one in 17.54?
So it's adding a new section in there.
Okay.
Let me look real quick here to see.
And then I guess I could have jumped to the decision document. Does that have the actual language in the context of 17.54?
You know, I think it probably has ellipsis, so it doesn't include the full chapter there. But the 1754 is.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's really built out. This answers a lot of my questions right here. PDF page 96.
Okay.
Yeah, you've got all of that in there. Okay, great. Yeah, and because my second question was sort of around what do you have for governing the process to be done with the RV and transition to the structure, and that looks like that's spelled out right there. Excellent.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Any other questions? Sal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say, Tom, I really appreciate your thoroughness, the methodical approach and detailed oriented approach that you take to all of these kind of statutory changes. I know they're probably reviewed by other people, but I just really appreciate your intellect and the way that you approach these problems. So I'm really grateful for the work and definitely support what you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's a team effort, and yeah, always have great feedback, and the final product's a result of the work of the Affordable Housing Committee recommendations and the work the Planning Commission addressed through their work session and hearing as well. So, yeah.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, I will ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5105 to a second reading.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Zach and seconded by Remy. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, signify by saying nay. Okay. I will, ordinance number 5105 passes on its second reading unanimously, and now I will ask the city attorney to read the ordinance again by title only.
Thank you, Mayor Hill. And it passed on first reading, so we're going to be doing the second reading of ordinance number 5105, and ordinance amending Title 17 zoning of the McMinnville City Code, adopting docket G2-21, housing-related legislative amendments, amending chapters 17.33, 17.54, 17.60, 17.63, and adding chapter 17.66.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, we will ask for a motion to adopt ordinance number 5105.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Remy and seconded by Kelly. I will ask Claudia to poll the council. Claudia?
Counselor Geary,
Aye.
Counselor Garvin,
Aye.
Counselor Minky,
Aye.
Counselor Peralta,
Aye.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Aye.
Council President Drapkin,
Aye.
and Mayor, oh, that's it, sorry.
That's it. So after the roll call, ordinance number 5105 is adopted by a vote of 5-0. We will now look at a first reading with a possible second reading of ordinance number 5106. I need to ask if any member needs to declare a potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves from regarding this ordinance. Okay. We will now consider the matter of ordinance number 5106. Does any counselor object to having the ordinance read by title only? Will the city attorney please read the ordinance into the record?
This is the first reading of ordinance number 5106, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 4636 and Title 16 of the McMinnville Municipal Code entitled Subdivisions, adopting a new Title 16 entitled Annexations, amending Title 17 Zoning, 17.06, 17.09, 1710, 17.72, and amending Chapter 9 Urbanization of the McMinnville Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you, Amanda. We will now call on Planning Director Heather Richards to present. Heather?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And as I bring my screen up, I wanted to thank Councilor Peralta. Tom is our detail guy, and we all bring different strengths to the table, but he definitely is the guy that brings all the details and does all the research. So thank you for thanking him for recognizing that. Okay. Hopefully this works. My computer has not been working great today in my Zoom meetings. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we're talking about ordinance number 5106. This is an ordinance for annexations. It's our docket 3-21, and it's pages 101 to 165 of your meeting packet. The purpose of this docket is to provide an annexation process for the city of McMinnville that's compliant with state regulations, with the city charter and local ordinances. Our current process isn't. It also that it provides a navigable path for land to be annexed into the city based upon the framework that we just adopted in our McMinnville Growth Management and Urbanization Plan. And then it's also a tool for the, It's also a tool for the city of McMinnville to ensure that future new development is responding to the community needs. The actions that need to take place to implement a new annexation process for the city of McMinnville is to amend the McMinnville Municipal Code, Chapters 16 and 17, amend the McMinnville Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 9, draft an annexation agreement, and develop annexation fees. Tonight, we are looking at the amendments to the code and the comprehensive plan. So ordinance number 5106, it amends Title 16 of our McMinnville Municipal Code by repealing the existing Title 16, which is a duplicate land division standard chapter of what we have in Title 17. So it's almost a verbatim text of what we have in our other title. And we are recommending replacing it with a new annexation code provisions with 16.10 being general provisions, 16.20 being annexation initiation, 16.30 being property subject to a section of Title 17, and 16.40 being properties not subject to that same Title 17. Then the amendments to Title 17 is relative to definitions, our area master planning process, and our applications and review process. And the amendments to Chapter 9 is for urbanization, our urbanization chapter. This also repeals Ordinance number 4636 as amended by Ordinance number 4670. That's the existing annexation process that the city has right now. So the process for developing this recommendation for you, we brought it to you as a work session with City Council on July 21st, 2021. We noticed it to DLCD on August 5th, 2021. We posted the public hearing in the News Register with the Planning Commission on September 8th, 2021. They hosted that public hearing on September 16th. At the public hearing, they had testimony by Mark Davis, and then they voted to recommend approval to you, the City Council. In terms of this meets the City Council goals and strategic plan in two ways. It meets two different goals, growth and development character, with 3 different strategic objectives associated with that. And then also the goal of creating diverse housing opportunities that support great neighborhoods. So what is annexation? We've talked about this at our work session, so I'll go through this fairly quickly, but it's a process by which a municipality, upon meeting certain requirements, expands its corporate limits. So it's how we bring land into the city limits for development. It's governed by ORS 222. It's governed by our city charter. It's governed by our comprehensive plan, and it's also governed by local ordinances. So all of those need to come into alignment. This is our new comprehensive plan map. Actually, this is hot off the presses today. We just finished this. But it's important to show it because what we'll be talking about is everything outside this red line right here, which is our city limits line. And everything outside of that that's in color is our land that's in our urban growth boundary that can annex into the city. So we have several different aspects of that land. We have the land that just came in through our UGB amendment, some very large tracts of land down here in the southwest area. They are all colored gold. This is our urban holding comprehensive plan destination. We also have little tracts of land up here by Baker Creek that still need to be annexed into the city. They're smaller tracts, and we're working on with actually several property owners right now on annexing those in, and they are all under a residential comprehensive plan designation. We also have a lot of these, more so than most communities. These are island annexations. So what this means is this is actually not land that's in the city limits, it's in the county, but surrounded by city limits land. And what's interesting, you can see this property right here over by Grand Haven. Because it's not in the city, we were not able to create the street to go across it. So we had to create a street that bypassed it. But I don't recommend island annexations moving forward. This is our new land that we just brought into the UGB. That's industrial land. So that's an industrial comprehensive plan designation. And we have some commercial land in the same, in a commercial comprehensive plan designation. So those are the types of lands that we have in our UGB and their comprehensive plan designations. And it's important because we'll talk about how this process impacts all of those. So the history of annexation in McMinnville is we've done it through ordinance, separate ordinances, and then we've amended those ordinances over the years. So we've had 6 of them, but basically it's remained the same in terms of the overall purpose and intent, and it has just changed to reflect changes in state law that have been migrating through. So our final ordinance we have is number 4636 here that was adopted in 1996 and then amended in 1998. However, in 1996, we adopted a local ballot measure that said that for annexations to occur in McMinnville, they needed to be approved by the local electorate. And that's what created that last ordinance, the ordinance number 4636. We also amended our McMinnville City Charter to reflect that, but we amended in such a way where it said, unless mandated by state law, Any annexation delayed or otherwise to the city of McMinnville may only be approved by a prior majority vote among the electorate. So regardless of size of property, if you wanted to annex into the city of McMinnville, you had to go through a vote at the ballot. In 2016, the state legislature passed a law that amending ORS 222, so that's the law that governs annexation, saying that cities, when there's 100% consent of the property owners to come into the city that want to annex into the city, and it meets the comprehensive plan, cities cannot take it to a vote. The city council must move forward with annexation of that property. So the city shall annex the territory without submitting the proposal to the electors of the city. So that then made us non-compliant with state law. So ordinance number 4636 has a variety of different things associated with it. They all comply into ORS 222, except for this last piece down here, which is refer to the electorate for a vote of approval or denial. The second piece of our process that we've gone through, so that's how we're non-compliant with state law and what our local ordinance is. Our next piece is our recent UGB amendment and the process we adopted with that with our McMinnville Growth Management and Urbanization Plan. So if you recall, for a lot of our property in the MGMUP, we said, let's do it as an urban holding comprehensive plan destination because we want to go through another level of planning process for these lands before they come into the city to identify how they're going to serve the city in terms of residential uses, parks uses, and mixed use uses. So with that, we set up a new process for coming into the city. We set up an area planning process. We set up a process for an annexation agreement that requires a concept master plan. And then we set up a master plan process and then annexation. And it's described in this flow chart here. And that was adopted by ordinance on December 8th, 2020. There was some confusion about that as we went into the annexation discussion as to what is governance and what's land use. Because annexation itself isn't necessarily land use, that's governance, but you have to show compliance with the comprehensive plan to be able to annex into the city. So where there was some confusion is this concept master plan piece here. So we're recommending this change to it, saying that the concept master plan is a component of the annexation application, which comes after the area plan and before the annexation agreement. So we can clarify that that's government and not land use. And the land use pieces are the area planning piece up here and then the master planning piece down here after the annexation agreement. And then after all this is achieved, that's when we annex into the city. So the proposed process actually identifies two new steps to the old process for McMinnville. We've removed the vote by the electorate because that's not allowed anymore, but we've added a legislative land use process with this area planning process. So what that means is this will be adopted, the area plan will be adopted as a supplemental document to the comprehensive plan. So it will be what we call a type 4 land use process. It will go through a public process with the Planning Commission and come to you, the City Council, and it's appealable. We still have the annexation application process, but we've added this annexation agreement piece to our overall flow chart, and that's an action of City Council. It's not a land use decision, and that's where you have a negotiation with the property owners to what you think the city needs for them to annex into the city. And then the compliance with the comprehensive plan remains the same, which is that they have to show how they're compliant with the comprehensive plan through a quasi-judicial land use process. And then the final action is the annexation action. So previously that was the vote of the electorate. Yes, you can come into the city. No, you can't come into the city. Now it's an annexation ordinance, which is an action of City Council for the state law of ORS 222. So this section down here says when you've determined that the criteria, so that it meets the comprehensive plan and everything, that's when you declare that the territory can come into the city by ordinance. So it shows the government's piece of it separated from the land use piece of it in ORS 222. So our recommendation is let's put a process together that mimics that, a process that has governance and a process that has land use. So the governance piece is Title 16. And that's sort of the where we've embedded the what are the requirements to come into the city? What are the procedures in which you need to follow to get into the city? And we're suggesting that come into the McMinnville City Code, so we're not keeping track of a variety of different ordinances that amend each other. And then the land use process is Title 17, so that's our zoning ordinance. And we're recommending amending that so it's clear what portions of this annexation process are land use processes. And that's the compliance with the comprehensive plan. So walking through the process fairly quickly, the first part is an area plan. The area plan is based on everything that's in gold. So anything that has an urban holding comprehensive plan destination must have an area plan before it annexes into the city. And we have a framework plan that we developed as part of our McMinnville Growth Management and Urbanization Plan. And that's sort of the high level planning for that area. And that's a guidance document for the area planning process. And in that guidance document, we talk about how much acreage should be assigned to each area for different things such as high density residential land need and parks land need. The city will undertake the area planning process. We've committed to doing one a year. And we've also set up a process where private property owners can do it themselves if they choose to do so, if we are not moving quickly enough for them. It's a comprehensive process. It's a very expensive process. So typically, my experience is property owners have waited for the city to initiate it. The second part of the process is an annexation application. What needs to be in the annexation application is in Title 16. That's part of the package tonight. And if applicable, it also includes providing a concept master plan with the annexation application. So right now, everything that we've talked about in terms of the types of property that will be annexed into the city require a concept master plan. The concept master plan is not a land use application. It's really just that, a concept master plan that shows how they intend to develop their project. And it's for you to use as city council to develop the annexation agreement. So the annexation agreement comes after the annexation application, and in Title 16 talks about what that annexation agreement could look like. All properties that want to annex into the city will need this annexation agreement that's approved by you as city council. It's a written agreement between the city and owners of land that want to come into the city, and it states the terms, conditions, and obligations of both parties for the annexation to be approved. It includes, but it's not limited to, provisions for public facilities and public services, a process for how to ensure that the annexation is consistent with the McMinnville Comprehensive Plan, and then any other provisions that the city deems necessary that meets the city ordinances and the community's identified needs. So these three items all come out of ORS 222 in terms of providing you the authority to require those as part of an annexation. What's in an annexation agreement, they're negotiated on a case-by-case basis with the property owners, and they're considered a contract. So some communities call them development agreements as well. It's developed after that annexation application, and it's a condition of annexation. So you can't annex into the city. The annexation agreement will say you can't annex into the city without this. It has the draft concept master plan that's required for it, and then that's not a land use decision, as we said. So for public facilities, typically you're looking at negotiating the dedication of public right-of-way with the annexation, asking the owner to dedicate it all with that action, any easements that you need for public infrastructure. There's often discussions about parks. So if there's a need for parks and the owner dedicating the necessary land to develop those parks, that can happen to annexation too. I've seen some annexation agreements require the developer to actually build out the park and then dedicate it to the city. And then they agree not to remonstrate against any future LIDs for public facilities. Then we have to show compliance with the comprehensive plan. So what the annexation agreement will do is spell out what is that. And it's based on the type of property that's coming in. So if it is a urban holding comprehensive plan designation and the property is larger than 10 acres, they will need to go through a master plan land use decision process. And that's in the code, and it was adopted with the UGB amendment. And that mirrors our great neighborhood principles. So that's where we captured how to get the great neighborhood principles into our land use process. If it is a urban holding comprehensive plan designation that's less than 10 acres, or it's a residential comprehensive plan designation, it would need to either have a plan development or a zone change and a subdivision approval. So typically these three would probably come in at the same time as a bundle because they would need to have an urban zone to annex into the city. And then if it's an industrial commercial comprehensive plan designation, it would typically be required to have a plan development or a zone change. If it's greater than 10 acres, no, this one is just a plan development or a zone change. The annexation is not effective until the land use process is final. So it allows for time to appeal the land use process if that's warranted. And then at the time of annexation, the city will apply the comprehensive plan designation that's in the area plan and or the zoning of the approved master plan so that the applicant can move straight into development. So you don't want to be bringing land into your city that the property owner is not intending to develop in the immediate future, because you're preserving capacity in your infrastructure system to serve that property. You also have the ability to negotiate community needs and values, and this is where we've talked about the affordable housing piece for McMinnville, because it's been identified as community need, and using the annexation agreement to require the developer to provide a certain number of units that are affordable housing units serving different households of different incomes. And so cities are using this in different ways, either by requiring the developer to build the housing units and partner with a housing provider that manages them, if they're subsidized units or if they're workforce units, for them to put them on the market as such, or to donate property that would be used for affordable housing. And we've talked about how to use things such as inclusionary zoning and community land trust for that provision. We just went through that. So the annexation ordinance, after you've achieved the compliance with the comprehensive plan and the annexation agreement's been signed, then the city would adopt an ordinance annexing that property into the city. So concerns raised through the process, Mark Davis raised some concerns early on that he sent to you as a city council after the work session, and expressed some concerns about citizen involvement. Is there still the same type of comprehensive citizen involvement in the process, public engagement, and the opportunity to appeal? And since the ability to require public vote is no longer legally allowed. So there was some discussion back and forth between Mark, myself, and the city attorney. And with that discussion, we tried to point out that the new process actually adds more opportunity for the public to participate. There's an additional land use process embedded in the overall workflow, and then that's a type 4 land use process, the area plan. So there's opportunity to appeal that. Mark testified at the Planning Commission public hearing, saying that he was supportive of the final proposal. He expressed his current concerns at that testimony, that we make sure that when we go through the area planning process, that we are retaining the parks and residential land need that's been identified for the UGB lands, to make that we're being good stewards of what that land need is, and we're bringing that into the area planning process. And he also expressed his concerns about the amount of island annexations within the city. Sid Freeman also provides some concerns after the work session, and in terms of the language that was in the proposal. And we concurred with his suggestions and made the suggested changes. And Friends of Yamhill County then provided a letter of support for the Planning Commission public hearing. So the action before you tonight is similar to the one you just had with the other ordinance. You can take action on the Planning Commission recommendation. You can request a public hearing to hear more testimony, or you could choose not to take action on the Planning Commission recommendation. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Any questions for Heather? Sal?
Hi, Heather. Thank you. I see that there is the Government Affairs Director for the Home Builders Association on today. Did you have any correspondence with the Home Builders Association as part of the drafting of this?
I didn't. Ryan and I spoke he's new into his position, so he reached out to me a couple of weeks ago to talk to me about the things that were going on in McMinnville, and I shared that we were bringing this package in. We didn't talk about it in detail, though.
But did you share with him the drafts ahead of the meeting?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Zach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple quick questions, if I may. Just so I can understand, because I'm just playing out the process in my head, and I just need to navigate a few mental roadblocks that I'm having. So the master plan, the concept, the area master plan gets developed, and is there a public hearing at any point in that process, or no?
So the area plan is different from the master plan. The area plan is developed, it comes to, and then it goes through what we call type 4 land use decision-making process. So that is your most comprehensive process. It's the same as a zone change or comprehensive plan map amendment. So it would go through a public hearing process with the planning commission. It would come up to you for recommendation as from the planning commission to city council. You would then have the opportunity to decide if you want to have a public hearing at the city council level, if you want to move forward with the recommendation of planning commission. Very similar to this process where I'm taking right now.
That was the master plan.
That's the area plan.
That's the area plan.
The master plan is the same though. So the master plan, so the area plan, you have to have an area plan if you're in that gold comprehensive plan designation, which is most of our UGB land, to even apply for annexation. To annex into the city, you will have to go through a master plan process, which shows how you're meeting the area plan and the great neighborhood principles. And that too is a type 4 land use process. So 2 separate processes that will both go through a public hearing with planning commission and up to city council for final decision making.
And are those applicable to the same properties and it's all part of the same process, or are those based on 2 separate types of property coming in?
Yeah, so the area plan is sort of a 30,000 foot level over 100 acres or more. So think of the 3 Mile Lane area plan that we are doing right now for 1,400 acres. And then a property owner who, let's pretend it's Kimco, has 90 acres and wants to annex into the city. They're then master planning that 90 acres and showing how they're meeting the goals and principles of the area plan, and then also how they're meeting goals and principles of our master planning process, which is the great neighborhood goal. So it takes it down to like a 5,000 foot level.
So we have a giant puzzle that we know what it looks like, and then someone brings their half of the puzzle together and is like, boom, this is it.
Yeah,
okay.
And it's more detailed. It's like under a magnifying glass, right?
And both of those have public hearings attached to them to get approved.
Yeah, so both of those are the most intensive land use processes.
And then, same question to both of those types of plans. Are they how are they not binding to what actually gets constructed?
They're binding. So so if you think of it like a string for a puppet that goes all the way down, the area plan is binding in that the master plan has to show how it's meeting the area plan. So the area plan will have like big bubbles of high density residential, mixed use development, major arterials. And if that's in that 90 acres that the property owners bring in, they have to show that they're meeting that area plan. And then they take it a little bit further. So we're looking at we're cutting off another layer and going into further details. The master plan itself, if they want, it's like a plan development, if you want to think of it that way, but it has it has to meet the great neighborhood principles. So it's going to have all of those, our baker's dozen of pedestrian connectivity, street connectivity, mixture of housing choices, all those things have to be met in the master plan. And that master plan is going to have comp plan, so they're going to come in, the master plan will have what the comp plan designation will be when it comes into the city, residential, industrial, commercial. It will have the zoning that they want to achieve on their property, so they'll get rezoned into that as well. And then the master plan will be binding on the property.
Binding on the property through transfers of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay. I guess so then it's not possible a scenario in which, let's say the plan is 10 houses, an apartment complex, and an office building, and then they go to build it, and then they say, oh man, that office complex wasn't financially feasible, we're not going to build it.
Yeah, so they would have to come in and amend their master plan.
And what's the process for that? Same sort of gets started over again through the same process, or are those amendments different?
So it made me just realize that we may not have that. I haven't looked at our master planning in 6 months, but I imagine it's similar to our plan development, which means if it's a minor amendment, it's done administratively and it describes what's minor.
Yeah.
If it's a major amendment, it goes through a land use process again.
And that you're saying that is in here or it's not in here?
It should be in here, so I'm looking it up right now.
Let the record show it only took 10 questions to stump the great planning. No. Okay. Well, that was the extent of my questions, other than if it was in there on the island annexation. I was reading about the 1 year, within 1 year. And is that defined further as to starting the process to bring that in within 1 year, or completing the process to bring that in within 1 year?
So,
and then what are the ramifications if that fails?
yeah, so I don't know why it has failed in the past year, because that's been in the ordinance from the very beginning. So that first ordinance, 6 ordinances ago for annexations, that's been in there. I don't know why it failed. I would say you shouldn't approve an annexation agreement that has an island annexation in it. That would be my advice as your planning director.
Right. So, okay. But future-proofing it, what are the structures tied around that? Is it within 1 year, and evidently ramifications don't matter if they're written because we've failed to fall through on that, right? Because we have a bunch of those islands.
What's interesting is for the ones that you have right now, and I think there's about 8 or 9 of them, or we have right now. What's interesting to me is that still has, if that property owner is not, doesn't consent to annex into the city, and most of them probably won't because they're happy, they don't pay city taxes, they use city entities, right? And so unless they want to develop it into a high density city development, they're not going to annex in. So if they're not willing to annex in, that has to go to a vote of the electorate, because that's not under this provision. So the way they changed the state law
fascinating.
Was if the property owners, 100% of the property owners consent to annex in, it can't go to a vote of the electorate. However, if you don't have the 100% of the property owners who consent to annex in, then you're still going to a vote of the electorate because that's still on the city charter.
Okay. And then at what size does this planning requirement kick in, right? If I have, a single R4 lot that I just want to do on my own.
Thank you for asking that.
Even if that's big or small, but.
That's the piece that we added just recently, which is page 156 of your packet, and it's in section 17.10.030. So we do have those in the city right now. We have pieces that are, interestingly, there's like 3 property owners who have been wanting to annex into the city for the past year now, but we didn't have a process. One has a piece of property that's mostly in the city, but 1.5 acres is not in the city. And so we can't annex that in because we don't have a process for it. So what we've said there is that those are exempt from the area planning process, the urban holding comprehensive plan designation, because to have 1.5 acres wait for area planning of 100+ acres doesn't make a lot of sense if it's part of another larger piece that's already in the city. That's the way that's written. That's the partial piece. And then the pieces that are smaller, less than 10 acres, they don't have to master plan to come into the city.
So I have a 5-acre parcel of, I guess it wouldn't have a zoning on it. I wouldn't have to master plan. I would just go to annex and then go to building or development or whatever right away.
If you are in the, you wouldn't, you would have to have an area plan if you're in the places where we have the urban holding comprehensive plan designation. So the parcels that are less than 10 acres there are rural residential areas. So like the, I forgot what it's called already, the Riverside Drive neighborhood over there, South Riverside, which is a lot, it's like 1 and 2 acre parcels. So that would need an area plan before any of them come into the city for annexation, because we want to do a comprehensive planning process for that. If it is, we have those parcels, the reason I showed you all those little parcels that are up there by Baker Creek is we have a lot of little 5 acre parcels that are sort of on the edge of the city, but aren't part of a larger tract of land in the UGB. And those have a residential comprehensive plan designation. They don't need an area plan because they're not planning with contiguous property next to them.
So if I'm hearing what you're saying on that last little piece, if I have a 1 acre parcel and is currently designated UH, I do need to be held to this area plan standard. And is that same is there an area plan or an area plan light? So is that the same standard that a 90 acre development would be? And the process is treating the 1 acre urban holding the same as the 90 acre urban holding?
No, so what would be different is if the 90 acre urban holding has a 5-step process.
Okay.
So area plan, annexation application, annexation agreement, master plan, annexation. The 1 acre property in urban holding would have a 4-step process. They don't have to do a master plan. They would have to do a land use process. So for 1 acres, it would probably be a subdivision or a partition or something like that. So they would have to do that and a zone change they'd have to get a comp plan map designation, zone change, and some sort of partition subdivision. They would do that as a bundle and come in.
And
but
I guess
the master plan principles.
Okay, and I'll follow this last thread, and then I'll cede my more than adequate time. What I'm feeling around for there, if you couldn't tell, is sort of if I have a small little thing and I want to just bring it in, are we bringing the full brunt of this mega land use process on someone who's like, man, I just want to build a single family residence in the city of McMinnville because that's what I want to do? Is it? Do you feel that this process is able to treat those more quickly and more equitably than bringing the full brunt of a 90 acre development?
Yeah, I think there's 3 levels of it. So I do think where we have the rural residential area, so the Riverside Drive neighborhood, we also have that little neighborhood off of Booth Bend that we brought in just recently that was rural residential as part of our UGB. Those are smaller acre parcels, and they will have to wait for an area plan. But they're very happy waiting. They're not anxious to come in, right? And I think as a city, we really want we want a bigger plan for that area to understand how it's going to develop, because they're kind of off by themselves. The property that is the little 5 acre ones that are up by Baker Creek, they can come in. What they're not being held to is 1, the area plan, or 2, the master plan process. So if you remember, the master plan process is the great neighborhood principles. So they have to show how they're meeting all these different principles for a small piece of property, which is, there won't be trails on that property and all sorts of other things. So they don't have to achieve that. They come in under our current land use process with a zone change and a subdivision application.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
I will think about it. I think so.
You have a couple of, for instance, there's 2, I think it might be on the line tonight because they've been anxiously waiting. We have a property owner who owns 2 acres. That's an island. We'd love to see that property come in. And it wants to do a 6 to 8 unit subdivision. So they could apply for annexation. They don't need an area plan. And they would need to go through a zone change subdivision land use process to show compliance to the comprehensive plan. And then they annex in.
Okay. Then the only thing I'll just say, if you follow up with if that one thing that you weren't sure if it was in there is in there or not.
Yeah,
let us know.
Talking.
If you quit jabbering with me, thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Let's go to Sal. I think Sal's waiting for Heather to get your answer, Zach.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sal. Amanda's looking it up and texting me right now.
Okay. Go ahead, Sal.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was speaking, but I had accidentally flipped off my mic. So there's many ways to fail a Zoom meeting. Heather, my main questions are all of these changes, or the majority of these changes, consistent with things that you've pulled out of codes from other cities? So they're relatively standard fare within the industry? Is anything in there something that you would describe as particularly controversial for any particular different sets of interests? I'm not really very expert in this area, and so I'm just kind of looking for any sort of red flags that I should be paying attention to.
I would say that they are standard fare for cities who are developing processes now. Bend does this, City of Bend does this, City of Redmond does this. I think City of Medford's adopting it too. So those cities that are recently gone through growth planning have adopted this type of process. Those cities whose growth planning is 20 years old and they haven't updated it probably don't have this process. And what would be new is the annexation agreement and the area planning piece.
So you I guess you don't consider this particularly controversial, any of the parts of this. It really just kind of facilitates the annexation process, and most interested parties should be relatively happy to have a straightforward process. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think if you asked the developer if they'd like to go to a vote of the electorate versus going through this process, they would choose this process. I think that the reason we recommended this process for McMinnville was because there's obviously an interest in McMinnville in being very involved in what that future development of that property will be that's annexing them to a micro level, right? That's why it went to a vote of the electorate and always had a site plan as part of the vote. So we felt the area planning helped achieve that sort of high level planning down to master planning, so that the community knows what's going to happen with that property. And then the annexation agreement, the affordable housing needs in McMinnville are so much that without the annexation agreement, I don't know how we would achieve them.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for Heather? Very good discussion, and Heather, you do know your code and state law. You're very good from that perspective, also.
Well, and just so to answer Zach's question, there is a place in our in chapter 17.72, which is our review procedures, that talks about amending a plan like a master plan. What we don't have is the specificity that we have for plan development. So I think what I will do is bring that forward in a separate process, that type of specificity as a housekeeping element.
So if Mr. Mayor, if I may, so the mechanism exists already in our code, and I can find it at 17.72, and that would apply to what we're doing here. But you're thinking maybe you'll bring something more pointed to connect the two?
Yeah, I think I'd like to evaluate it. I know for plan development amendments, which act like master plans in McMinnville, that it's specific in the code as to what's a minor amendment and what's a major amendment. And what goes through what process. And that provides clear and objective standards to the developer, which is what we're always trying to achieve.
If you permit me, the way you phrase that, do you see this process taking place of plan developments, or is this only governing the new stuff versus, well, I guess at some point it'll all be new stuff, but do you see this taking place of the plan development process?
No, I don't. I see it will be another tool in the toolbox, and it will be a requirement of all land annexing into the city.
And this is a better way of getting ahead of it upstream to guide where that ends up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we're talking. Okay,
it will connect the bigger puzzle pieces better.
Puzzles. Okay. Cool.
Any other discussion or questions? Seeing none, then I will ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5106 to a second reading.
I'll move.
And a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Zach and seconded by Kelly. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed, please signify by saying nay. Okay, the first reading, or the first reading passes on a vote of 5-0. Ordinance number 5106 passes on its first reading unanimously. So we will now ask the city attorney to read the ordinance again by title only.
This is the second reading of ordinance number 5106, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 4636 and Title 16 of the McMinnville Municipal Code entitled Subdivisions, adopting a new Title 16 entitled Annexations, amending Title 17 zoning 17.06, 17.09, 1710, 17.72, and amending Chapter 9 Urbanization of the McMinnville Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you, Amanda. I will ask for a motion to adopt ordinance number 5106.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Zach and seconded by Kelly. I'll ask the city recorder to poll the council.
Counselor Geary,
I used to going first. Aye.
Counselor Garvin,
Aye.
Counselor Minke,
Aye.
Counselor Peralta,
Aye.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Aye.
and Council President Drapkin.
Aye.
Thank you, Claudia. After the roll call vote, ordinance number 5106 is adopted, a vote of 5-0. That concludes our
Mayor,
meeting.
it's actually 6-0.
Oh, excuse me, 6-0. That adjourns our meeting this evening. It is 8:57. Thank you for your participation, and we'll see everyone a little later. Thanks.